All right, so let's see, we have, it looks like, got some folks in here. I think that if you're set with this, Ona, I will do my brief welcome here, and then we can get started. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. I see folks are signing in here. It's, as I say, always really nice to see some familiar names joining us, even if we can't be in person right now. It is great that you are with us. If you don't know me, I am Elena Traster. I am a professor in the Environmental Studies Department at MCLA, the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts, if you don't know the full name. So we have this annual Green Living Seminar in the spring, and this semester our seminar is organized around the theme Individual Actions and Environmental Sustainability. These are all always free and open to the public, and this year they are taking place on Wednesdays at 5:30. You can register online for upcoming presentations at www.mcla.edu/greenliving, all one word. And there you can also find links to our YouTube channel where you can find recordings of previous presentations. So our presentation today will go for about 40 minutes or so, and we will have a Q&A session following it. We are going to leave the Q&A box open, so anytime you have a question, feel free to enter it. We won't get to those until the Q&A session at the end. And a quick announcement for next week's presentation. I hope you'll come back and join us again on March 10th. We'll be hearing from Dr. Nell Putnam-Farr, Assistant Professor of Marketing at Rice University, who's going to be presenting a lecture titled Framing Messages to Make Them Appealing. Today's presentation on factors that influence electric vehicle adoption will be given by Dr. Ona Egbue, Associate Professor of Informatics and Engineering Systems at University of South Carolina, Upstate. We're really glad to have you with us today. I'll turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Alina. I am very glad to be here and welcome everybody to the presentation. So today I'll be talking about factors that affect electric vehicle adoption. I'll be talking about with a particular focus on consumer adoption and issues that affect consumer adoption, not just only technical issues, but also what are all the social issues and economic issues that affect electric vehicle adoption. Before we get started, I would just like to give a little bit background about myself. So I have a bachelor's degree in electrical and electronics engineering and a master's degree in earth and environmental resources management. My PhD is in engineering management from Missouri University of Science and Technology. I've been working on electric vehicle research for over a decade now. It's been very exciting, and there's been a lot of changes within that time, and we'll talk about some of that during this presentation. So my research focuses on solving multidisciplinary energy and transportation issues that have significant policy implications. These range from addressing barriers to electric vehicle adoption to managing the integration of electric vehicles into the power grid. So on one hand, and that's part of this presentation, I'm looking at what are the factors that affect electric vehicle adoption, what are some of the barriers and how can these be addressed? And then on the other hand, I'm also looking at what happens. So when those barriers are addressed and you have a widespread adoption of electric vehicles, especially the plug-in electric vehicles, how do you manage the integration of those vehicles into the electrical grid, right? So how can you, rather than electric vehicles being a load and a potential problem for the power system, how can you make them a solution to helping, to dealing with some of the solutions that the power grid is actually currently facing? So that's kind of the range of issues that I look at when it relates to electric vehicles. In particular, my research considers that interaction between technology and social systems. So socio-technical analysis is looking at the analysis of the interaction between complex technological systems and social forces, and instead of separating technical issues from social issues, is looking at it as more of a big picture view. So you're more likely to have a better understanding of how things work, because with respect to electric vehicle, you can argue that social issues are as much of a problem compared to technical issues. So for today's presentation, I was thinking of what research to talk about, what topic to talk about, and I chose a paper, a research that was published in 2012. I chose that research because it's still, even though it's almost a decade now, it's still very much relevant. But I also chose it because a large percentage of the study sample were college students, and I thought that that would be applicable to this presentation. So I'll talk about that, and as I talk about the research, I will kind of highlight changes that have occurred since then and how that has impacted electric vehicle adoption. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. What's the reason for electric vehicles? Why are they important? Why are they becoming popular? The main reason for that is the fact that transportation accounts for about 24% of direct CO2 emissions from fuel combustion. Road transportation accounts for nearly 3/4 of the emissions from transportation. The good news is that global transport emission increased by less than 0.5% in 2019 compared to about 1.9% annually since 2000. So the rate of growth is kind of declining. And part of this was due to transportation electrification, so having more electric vehicles on the road, increased use of biofuels, as well as improved vehicle efficiency for conventional vehicles. The bad news is that road transport emissions continues to increase despite these improvements. Considering the impact of climate change, emissions from road transportation actually need to decrease. Yes, it's growing at a slower pace, but it needs to actually decrease. So that is important. So a major challenge facing the transportation sector is developing innovative and affordable transportation technologies that can compete with current conventional vehicle technologies, but do not rely on fossil fuels. So electric vehicles is a viable technology that can help transform the transportation sector and help reduce those CO2 emissions. Despite the advantages of electric vehicles, they represent a small share of the market for electric vehicles that are currently in service. So in 2019, based on the International Energy Agency data, it was a record year for electric vehicles in terms of the numbers of electric vehicles that were sold globally. This was about 2.1 million vehicles, and it surpassed 2018, which itself was also a record-breaking year. But that amount represents about 2.6% of the market share. So despite significant growth in electric vehicles over the last decade, 2.6% of the market share is not, obviously it makes a difference because it's certainly helping with the emissions, at least helping with reducing emissions from new cars, but that number needs to increase so that impact, you can have a high impact on the transportation sector as a whole. So adoption of electric vehicles is critical. You have to address issues related to both the technology, but also issues related to the consumers, the potential drivers of electric vehicles, so that they are more willing to purchase electric vehicles. But historically, the trend in technology adoption suggests that while new technology appeals to a small group of early adopters, most consumers remain closed-minded about new technology. They're hesitant to buy new technology. So a lot of people want to see other people drive the cars first for a while, a long time, before they get comfortable. And so people just don't trust the new technology. They think their current cars work just fine and they don't need to make that transition to electric vehicles, or they do not believe electric vehicle performance or maybe other attributes of electric vehicles are competitive or comparable with their current conventional vehicles. So there are lots of different issues and barriers that prevent the adoption of electric vehicles. So I'd like to describe, because a lot of people say electric vehicles, but sometimes when they're saying electric vehicles, they mean different things. So just to define how the definitions of electric vehicles that I use in the study. So your conventional car, which is what a lot of people, most people drive these days and are familiar with, uses an internal combustion engine, right? The internal combustion engine that burns petroleum. It's not very efficient, and it contributes a significant amount of CO2 emissions. Electric vehicles, on the other hand, has partial or entire propulsion power provided from electricity. So it can be partially or entirely propelled by power generated from electricity. A hybrid electric vehicle, I'm sure most of you, or all of you, are familiar with Toyota Prius. That's one of the most popular hybrid electric vehicle brands. It combines an internal combustion engine with an electric motor that uses energy stored in the batteries. A plug-in hybrid electric vehicle is powered by an electric motor and an internal combustion engine, just like the hybrid electric vehicle, but plug-in hybrid electric vehicles can charge their batteries through charging equipment. So unlike the hybrid electric vehicles, you can actually plug in electric vehicle into an electrical outlet and you can charge it. Now, a battery electric vehicle, also known as an all-electric vehicle, relies entirely on electricity for propulsion power. So, unlike plug-in hybrid and electric vehicle that has the flexibility of power source, so you can charge it and you can also use gasoline. A battery electric vehicle is entirely based on electricity, so you have to charge it. And then we'll talk about issues with that and concerns that people have with battery electric vehicles because of that characteristic. So I just pulled together some information, some news. This is from New York Times about electric vehicles. So you can see that there's a lot of news about electric vehicles, changes that are happening. This is because virtually all major vehicle manufacturers are manufacturing electric vehicles, and they're setting quite ambitious goals. So actually, it was brought to my attention today, the news about Volvo. This was brought to my attention by an MCLA student, Michael, who I spoke to earlier today, and he sent me the article. So this actually happened. This article was I think this happened yesterday. So this is really recent news. So thank you, Michael, for bringing that to my attention. So Volvo actually plans to sell only electric cars by 2030, right? So that's a major vehicle manufacturer, and they're transitioning entirely to electric vehicles by 2030. So that's quite interesting. And then General Motors plans to sell only zero emissions vehicles by 2030. And so you can see now, again, this is kind of setting the trend for auto manufacturers to also set goals to transition to zero emission vehicles or entirely electric vehicles. So what this illustrates is the fact that vehicle manufacturers understand that electric vehicles are here to stay. They understand that electric vehicles are the future of transportation, and they are taking measures to kind of produce the vehicles that will be available for customers to purchase. So there are several projections about electric vehicle growth. And the ranges vary widely. So in the US, the growth, just like global growth, it's grown considerably. In 2018, electric vehicle based on the data source by McKinsey rose by about 80% in 2018, and this was driven mostly by Tesla Model 3. So that drove sales. Now in 2019, again, just the same as global sales, the US sales also slowed in 2019. And one can assume that with the current pandemic, that this would impact vehicle sales for 2020 and likely 2021 as well. So this study, this projections, growth scenarios are from US Drive, and they're estimating that EV sales in 2030 will range from 320,000 vehicles to 2.2 million to 6.8 million in their low, medium, and high scenarios, respectively. So you can see that this is a very wide range, from 320,000 to 6.8 million. So that's essentially from 2% of new vehicle sales to about 40% of new vehicle sales. So what's going to determine what the actual outcome would be? It's going to be determined by how much people like electric vehicles, are interested in purchasing electric vehicles, and actually go out and purchase electric vehicles. So adoption will determine what the actual numbers will end up being. So it's very key. It's key to kind of address the issues that stem from customer concerns, consumer concerns, potential electric vehicle drivers. College students are next generation electric vehicle drivers. So it's very important to kind of look at what are some of the challenges. Now, since the study, like I mentioned, was published in 2012, there's been significant changes, improvements in technology, in cost, in lots of different aspects, but there are still barriers that still need to be addressed. There's a reason why 2019 sales was 2.6% of global sales, right? There's certainly still some issues that need to be overcome to be able to get to maybe a medium scenario or high scenario as shown in this figure. So this figure illustrates the impact of consumer perceptions on electric vehicle adoption, right? The importance of knowledge and perceptions. First of all, you have to be aware of the technology, right, to have a positive or negative perception about it. So if you have if a person has a high knowledge about electric vehicles and they have a positive perception about electric vehicles, then they are more likely to be a potential adopter. However, if a person has high knowledge but a negative perception, they're likely to be a potential non-adopter. Now, if someone has low knowledge or no knowledge about electric vehicles, if they have no interest in learning about it, then they're also going to end up being a potential non-adopter. Now, if they learn about it and they develop positive perceptions, they will end up, they are likely to be a potential adopter. You know the saying about perception is reality. So if people end up with negative perceptions of electric vehicles, even if that's not necessarily the reality, it really doesn't matter to them. That's their reality, and they will be less likely to be an adopter of electric vehicles. So knowledge and perceptions and attitudes have a key role to play in terms of electric vehicle adoption. So the objectives of that study, we're trying to investigate how differences in consumer populations change opinions and perceptions about electric vehicles, and how this can be used to determine socio-technical obstacles to electric vehicle adoption. I mentioned earlier about looking at both social and technical issues together. So socio-technical encompasses not just the technical issues, but also economic issues, social issues, policy issues, environmental issues. So just taking a big picture approach to look at that. So we wanted to look at how the perceptions and preferences, to categorize those perceptions and preferences so that we could identify the barriers. And one of a key part of this was also to determine how much influence does sustainability have on vehicle purchase decision. So typically you would think that if someone believes that they're an environmental, they want to engage in environmental friendly actions or take actions that have less impact on the environment or reduce their carbon footprint, they may be more open to purchasing an electric vehicle. All right, so we wanted to see how much influence does that have. If people consider sustainability when purchasing cars, how would that affect their interest or in purchasing an electric vehicle? And then the secondary objective was to relate certain socioeconomic characteristics, including education, age, gender, experience, and income, to individual perceptions and attitudes towards electric vehicles. Now, this study, like I mentioned earlier, involved students. Also wanted to test to see if there were any statistical differences between students and non-students. All right, so how did we go about getting the data that we used for the study? It was an internet-based survey. The survey was distributed to students, faculty, and staff at a university. This is actually a science and technology university. So we classified we considered that the majority of the sample would be technology enthusiasts. And I defined technology enthusiasts as individuals that are better connected with global technology development. They have high levels of quantitative skills compared to just a regular person, a member of the public, and they are more equipped to sort out the many technological, financial, and environmental differences between electric vehicles and conventional gasoline-powered vehicles. So for this study, we consider that these individuals are likely to be early adopters of electric vehicles only if they perceive electric vehicles to be superior in performance compared to internal combustion engine vehicles. We used a chi-square test here to investigate the differences between differences in perceptions and attitudes among the sample. The chi-square test is used to investigate statistical association between variables. This is done primarily by testing the null hypothesis of no association between a set of groups or outcomes for a particular response. Now, if the Pearson chi-square test statistic is large, then you can reject that null hypothesis for you can reject that null hypothesis in favor of the alternative hypothesis of a general association. And for this study, we used the standards 5% cutoff for defining what is a statistically significant difference. So therefore, an associated p-value of less than 0.05% means that there is significant evidence of an association between variables. Okay, so I mentioned that the web-based survey was distributed to a university, science and technology university, students, faculty, and staff. The sample, as you can see, had a significantly higher representation of males compared to females. It was males represented 71% of the sample. The overall sample is relatively young compared to the general US population. So we had about 88% were between the ages of 18 and 44. Now, it makes sense that the age of the respondents can be attributed to the fact that the majority are students, undergraduate or graduate students. From an education standpoint, the majority of the sample were working towards or had completed a graduate or undergraduate degree. Now, it's important to note that the sample does not necessarily represent the general population. But it provides helpful information about this particular group that we termed the technology enthusiasts, who have, again, high quantitative skills, might have more knowledge about electric vehicles and compared to conventional vehicles. So one of the questions that was asked was in the survey was what the experience was with alternative fuel vehicles. We wanted to see how much experience the respondents have with alternative fuel vehicles, and so this includes not just electric vehicles but biofuels vehicles and other types of vehicles that do not use conventional fuels, petroleum. And you can see that 53% indicated that they had some experience with alternative fuel vehicles at the time. 47%, however, said they did not. The chi-squared test, chi-squared analysis, showed that there were significant differences in prior experiences with alternative fuel vehicles based on gender. The results showed that males were more likely than females to indicate some experience with electric vehicles. So that was a finding for this particular part of the study. When asked about interest in electric vehicles, there were statistically significant differences in interest in electric vehicle based on gender and education. So males were more likely than females to be interested in, to show, indicate interest in electric vehicles, and individuals working towards a graduate degree or had completed a graduate degree were more likely to express interest compared to individuals who were working towards or had completed a bachelor's degree. But you can see that overall, about 77% indicated moderate to high interest in the electric vehicle. So one of the things we're trying to determine was what people associate with electric vehicles. Most of the associations with electric vehicles were with regard to environment, battery performance, battery performance and charging, efficiency, high purchase cost, fossil fuels, and so on and so forth, as shown in the slide here. The individuals who generally had a positive view of electric vehicles mentioned the efficiency of electric vehicles in terms of fuel savings. So we had comments like electric vehicles are non-gas guzzlers, they have high MPG. In addition, these individuals also refer to electric vehicles as the future of transportation. The way, comments like the way of the future of travel, with some of the comments that were made in this regard. Also, there were comments about environmental benefits. Individuals associated environmental benefits with electric vehicles. Electric vehicles were called green vehicles or vehicles with zero emissions, and comments about it being environmentally friendly. On the other hand, negative associations with electric vehicles included the high purchase cost, concerns about limited battery life, concerns about battery range, long recharging time, environmental impact from increased fossil fuel use at power plants to generate electricity to charge the plug-in electric vehicles. That's the plug-in hybrid and the battery electric vehicles. So in response to the question about the likelihood to purchase an alternative fuel vehicle, so again, this is not just limited to electric vehicles, it's a broader term that includes vehicles that do not rely on fossil fuels, essentially. 49% of the respondents indicated that they were either likely or very likely to purchase an alternative fuel vehicles. 37% and 15% chose somewhat likely and not at all likely. So there is interest, not necessarily, well, in terms of likely to very likely, it was about 49%. So most of, a big chunk of the respondents were indicated that they were somewhat likely, and not at all likely was just 15%. Now, for this particular response, we didn't find any statistically significant differences between age, gender, income levels, and education. Okay. The results showed, this is the result that we got based on that. So there's clearly interest in terms of likelihood to purchase an electric vehicles. They're not necessarily saying that they're going to go out the next day and purchase an electric vehicles, but at least they have a positive, they are open to purchasing electric vehicles, and they're likely to purchase that in the future, hopefully in the near future. So the respondents identified these attributes in terms of attributes of electric vehicles, and this is shown in the order in which they were ranked. So decreasing and eliminating the use of petroleum was one of the attributes that that they selected, most highest ranked one. Less maintenance, reduced greenhouse gas emission, looks and style and comfort were the last and received the lowest ratings. Again, there were no statistically significant differences in concerns based on age, education, income, or between students and non-students. So from this, the most appealing attribute of an electric vehicle was selected to be decreasing or eliminating the use of petroleum. So this is an attribute about being environmentally friendly. So this shows the concerns about electric vehicles, the ranking of the concerns. The plurality of the respondents shows battery range as the most significant concern about electric vehicles. And next, the second biggest concern was the cost, followed by the charging infrastructure, and then reliability and safety. So safety received by far the lowest, was the lowest option. The chi-squared analysis showed significant association between concerns and gender, with the largest number of males expressing concern about battery range, while the largest number of females were more concerned about the costs. Now, this results are also contrary to studies on EV, a lot of studies, most studies on EV that show that cost is the main attribute that governs vehicle purchase decisions, right? So an expectation, because this study was, the majority of respondents were students, the expectation was that cost would be the greatest concern, considering that these are college students that are likely earning limited income. However, the fact that cost was ranked lower than battery range may be attributed to the fact that, again, the technologically minded target group that we were studying may be more likely to rank technical problems higher than financial problems. So this is essentially saying that even if cost wasn't an issue, they won't be unwilling to purchase an electric vehicle, again, if the range, battery electric vehicle in this case, because that's the vehicle that is electric vehicle that is most affected by the range issue, because it relies entirely on electricity. So they are willing to purchase that if the range issue is not addressed. Now, you can see that safety was ranked as by far the lowest concern, but despite the fact that less than 1% of the sample selected safety as a concern, as the most important concern, because this question was essentially asking what is the most important concern, because so only less than 1% selected that. When asked about how they felt about electric vehicle safety, only 57% agreed or strongly agreed that electric vehicles are a safe mode of transportation. About 26% indicated that they were unsure. So that large number of unsure responses suggested limited understanding of electric vehicle safety amongst this group. Now, in terms of fuel source and storage, electric vehicles have two disadvantages compared to internal combustion engine vehicles. Electric vehicles are typically more expensive, and refueling is typically slower. It takes longer to charge an electric vehicle than going to the gas station to refuel internal combustion engine vehicle. So again, this issue affects mainly battery electric vehicles because they rely solely on those onboard batteries, and they typically, especially at the time the study was conducted, they have less range than your gasoline-powered vehicles, and they cannot be quickly recharged doing travel. So you can't just stop for 5 minutes to quickly refuel like you would do with a conventional car. You'd have to spend some time charging, depending on what kind of charger you're using. If you are using a fast charger, that significantly limits the amount of time you're spending. If it's a level 2 charger, that could take you hours just to recharge. Now, the majority of the respondents, about 71%, travel fewer than 20 miles per day. 79% travel fewer than 30 miles per day, and 87%, so most of them, the vast majority, travel fewer than 40 miles per day. And this is consistent with the National Household Travel Survey, which shows that on average, a person in the United States travels less than 40 miles per day. So in general, greater range is more desirable. You can see here the actual miles that the individuals drive, that's the light blue, and then you can see the dark blue, which is the desired battery electric vehicle range. So you have people who drive less than 10 miles, right? Some of this, but when it comes to range, most people want ranges that are greater than 50 miles, right? So, so greater range is desirable. However, as the range of the battery increases, so does the cost. So the key question here was really, what is the minimum range you will be willing to accept before you will consider buying a battery electric vehicle, because that's the type of electric vehicle that is mostly affected by range. And in this case, the next figure here kind of shows you what the individual selected. Only 32% of respondents were interested in battery electric vehicles that had ranges between 0 and 100 miles. 23% selected ranges between 100 and 200 miles, and then 45% chose ranges 200 miles and above. You can see some people selected 1,200 mile range. That would be a really expensive car, at least at this time. As time goes on, now since this study was conducted, range has increased significantly. You have the Tesla Model 3 now that has a range of, I believe the base model has a range of about 263 miles. And it's still more expensive than your conventional car. But at the time that the study was done, a lot of electric vehicles were around, up to 100-mile range. Some were more than that, but they were quite expensive. Tesla vehicles at the time, the other models, not Model 3 wasn't available at the time, were available, but those were really expensive vehicles. So you can see that with the range, now actually the median range was 200 miles. So the median range there was 200 miles, which a lot of some of the battery electric vehicles that are currently commercially available can actually meet those. Again, there's that question of cost, of how much you can pay, how much you're willing to pay to get that additional range. But then you have on the right-hand side of that figure, you have those who want the range of 600 and above, and so maybe not quite ready to purchase an electric vehicle unless they change their mind about what the minimum range that they would choose. So you can see that there's a gap between individual expectations of driving range for a battery electric vehicle and their actual driving distances, right? And this disparity is really not surprising. It's partly attributed to range anxiety. And that's the fear of being stranded in a battery electric vehicle because you have insufficient range to reach your destination. And maybe your battery essentially depletes in the middle of nowhere and you don't have access to a charging station, so you're stranded. So that causes people to want ranges that are really high and maybe not so realistic. But again, there's that issue of the trade-off between range and cost. So for example, maybe somebody who drives less than 10 miles, for example, based on the results here, might still be wanting a range of 200 miles or more, because they might be factoring in that one trip that they make, once every 6 months. That is they make a 300-mile trip, or maybe they don't, but they just want that extra range just for comfort, just to feel comfortable with the vehicle, just the same kind of comfort that they feel with conventional vehicles. So there's always that comparison going on between electric vehicles and conventional vehicles, how convenient they are compared to conventional vehicles. Some people may just not be willing to accept the time that it takes to charge a car, to wait to charge a car if the range is not long enough to take them, it's not enough to take them maybe on a round trip. They don't want to stop somewhere and have to wait 1 hour just to charge, or even more than that, depending on what kind of charger that you're using, what level of charger that is being used. All right, so talking about charging, so many of the respondents indicated that when they were talking about range, there was, again, this study, there was a lot of comments about depends, a lot of things depending on a lot of other things. The choice of battery was going to depend on how long it took to recharge the battery. And many of the respondents also indicated that if electric vehicles could be quickly recharged on the go, they would not expect the range to be that great. Only about 32% of the sample thought that charging an electric vehicle was convenient compared to refueling a gasoline vehicle. And so I asked specifically about quick charging and asked what time that they would prefer. You could see that most of the respondents wanted to be able to charge in 10 minutes or less, which is not very realistic for, it might be, at least for a battery electric vehicle, it will take longer than that, even with the fast charging. You might be able to, maybe within 30 minutes, charge. A lot of times, sometimes it's higher than that. It might be under an hour, over an hour, depending on what vehicle you have and what kind of, if you're using a quick charging, that would determine how much time you need to charge. So that unwillingness to spend time in charging might is a barrier to them adopting, these particular people, individuals adopting electric vehicles, battery electric vehicles, because that's the one that is affected by this. Now, just one of the things that we kind of asked this group was the idea of battery swapping stations. So battery swapping essentially is a scenario where you, rather than, since charging seems to be an issue, so rather than just waiting to charge, you can just stop at a battery swap station and you just swap out your battery. So you just exchange your battery. So really fast, it doesn't take a lot of time. And you can see that there was a lot of interest in that. Another part of the appealing aspect of this was the idea of separating the electric vehicle, cost of electric vehicle ownership from the battery, since the electric vehicle batteries are a significant part of the electric vehicle cost. So this seemed to be more appealing, and a lot of they seemed to be more interested, attracted to the idea of a scenario where there's a subscription, like a monthly subscription, where you can subscribe for your battery and you own the vehicle, but the battery has a subscription plan where you just subscribe to it, and so you don't have ownership. You don't have to worry about if anything goes wrong with the battery, and you just swap out the battery. Unfortunately, battery swap stations are really not existent for the most part. So maybe something for the future. Again, one of the objectives of this study was looking at familiarity with sustainability. How does that and how does sustainability impact vehicle purchase decision? So 83% of the sample indicated that they were familiar with sustainability. And of that 83%, 79% of them indicated that it does influence their charging, influence their buying decision. But then when asked if electric vehicles were more sustainable compared to gasoline vehicles or other alternatives, you can see a lot of people were neutral. So 43%, only 7% strongly agreed, 7% strongly agreed, 25% agreed, but 43% were neutral about this. So that just shows a lot of uncertainty about electric vehicle being sustainable. So, for example, someone who is trying to reduce their impact on the environment, if they do not believe that electric vehicles are sustainable, they're less likely to go out and purchase the vehicle. So that is an issue that needs to be considered. Now, for this, there were differences based on gender. Differences based on gender were statistically significant. 57% of females were more neutral on the sustainability of electric vehicles compared to 37% of males. Now, one thing to consider is the location. So this university is located in Missouri. More coal is burned for electricity generation in Missouri than in any other state except for Texas and Indiana. In 2019, 73% of Missouri's net generation was from coal. So later comments that I'll talk about also indicated that there were concerns about the generation of electricity that is used for charging the electric vehicles. So this just shows the price that the respondents were willing to accept, and you can see again it's a very wide range. Actually, it went from $0, so people were willing to purchase an electric vehicle at the time, or maybe already had an electric vehicle, to an infinite amount. So this was a text, a question where they could type in their answers, and some respondents just kept typing in zeros until maybe they got tired or they ran out of space. So it went from 0 to an infinite number of amount for the price of gasoline. So those extreme cases were kind of disregarded, and so on average, the price was the minimum price that they would accept to purchase an electric vehicle before being persuaded to buy an electric vehicle was 5.42%. So that's quite a really high number. So again, ranging from respondents that were very willing to buy electric vehicles without any persuasion to a few respondents who had really strong resistance. They said they would rather walk and not have a car than buy an electric vehicle. So that means that even drastic increase in gas prices was not enough incentive for them to purchase the electric vehicles. And these individuals had indicated prices again from $50 to an infinite amount of dollars. Again, depends featured a lot in the study about in general the result. So people said it would depend on other issues, maybe issues with technology. If technology got better, they might be more willing to purchase an electric vehicle. So this finding suggests that higher gas prices together with lower electric vehicle costs will positively impact electric vehicles. As gas prices rise, more people may consider electric vehicles to be worthwhile investments. So just to wrap this up, there are lots of issues that we identify, a lot of factors that affect the electric vehicles. I mentioned that range was the main concern. Cost is a concern. So when you address the range issue, then you have to address the cost issue, because a significant number of the respondents were not willing, did not indicate interest in the electric vehicle unless the cost issue was addressed. The comments about charging infrastructure, as I talked about, the responses that indicated range anxiety. So that creates a chicken and egg problem where electric, potential buyers don't want to buy the car because they don't, especially for battery electric vehicles, they don't have the charging infrastructure is not as widely available as they would like. And then on the other hand, you have the investors that are not willing to invest in more infrastructure without having more electric and battery electric vehicle drivers. So that creates that issue. Again, there were concerns about the environment, concerns about electric vehicle transferring pollution from the tailpipe to the power plant. So in places where there are more renewable sources or less polluting sources, there might be less of a concern about that in terms of concerns about moving pollution from one location to the other. Also having more options available will certainly help with the adoption and help with customer perception. So all these factors help to improve consumer perception and also the improvement of technology, which is, again, improved drastically. The cost has gone down drastically, but electric vehicles are still more expensive typically than conventional vehicles. the government policy plays a critical role in addressing some of those issues. Like right now, you have government incentives, tax rebates that help with electric vehicle adoption. Now, these tax rebates run out at a certain point. They phase out at least for the federal government taxes rebates. Incentives, they phase out after a certain number of vehicles in the hope that by then economies of scale will kick in and the vehicles will be more competitive. So these are important factors to consider. So in this study, there was moderate to high interest in electric vehicles. Attitudes were neither wholly positive nor wholly negative, but there was really moderate to high interest in electric vehicles. Sustainability plays a role in electric vehicle adoption, but it was ranked behind performance and cost in terms of vehicle purchase decision. And then lastly, the major barrier that was detected was that uncertainty about safety, uncertainty about the battery technology, uncertainty about sustainability of the fuel source. So electric vehicles battery electric vehicles, for example, don't emit any emissions at the tailpipe, but what is the pollution going on in the power plants to be able to generate the electricity to charge those vehicles? So those were some of the concerns that were featured there. So again, someone who consider sustainability is trying to reduce their impact may have reservations as a result of that. All right, thank you. Any questions for me at this point?
Thank you very much. So let's see, I will also invite Ty to rejoin us here. Don't forget, participants, if you would like to either submit a question in the Q&A, or you're welcome to also raise your hand. You should be able to do that. And if you'd like to just unmute, I should be able to help you have that functionality. If you'd like to ask a question, feel free to do that. And so Ty, I know before our talk, you had actually brought up something you noticed in this paper. And I hope you could ask Ona now, because it was a great question. So can I throw it over to you?
Okay. Yeah, so in the paper that you sent before the presentation, there's a question on the survey that I thought was pretty interesting. It was, do you have accessibility to an external electrical outlet to charge an EV where your car is parked at your primary residence? And 49% said no. So I was wondering if you thought that was like a big barrier for some people to start their transfer over to electrical vehicles.
Yes, so so you're talking about an electrical outlet for charging.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a great question. Thank you, Ty. So it's part of that concern about having, this is not necessarily your typical charging, commercial charging infrastructure, but also accessibility to somewhere to charge at home. If you don't have access to an electrical outlet, you don't have a garage or something, or anywhere that you can plug in and charge at home, that may discourage an individual from purchasing an electric vehicle, right? Because that means that they have to charge all the time outside their primary residence, maybe at work, or they have to go to commercial charging stations to charge. So yes, that is an impact. Now, one of the considerations, part of why there's a high number, is the fact, again, we're looking at a college campus, right? So you probably have students living in dorms and things like that. So they are not necessarily going to have access to charging stations. However, if the universities can provide make charging infrastructure widely available to students, then maybe that won't be such an issue for that kind of location.
Thank you.
I also wanted to follow up on another question that came up before the talk, which was whether there has been additional research looking at these kinds of questions in a broader population. Have you been able to work on further surveys to know whether this was, how representative this was, or what differences you might see outside of a sort of a technical college campus?
Well, even at the time when I was doing the study, I was kind of looking at other studies, like what I found about range being ranked the most important concern. Other studies, just general population, cost was a major issue. One other thing, again, comparing this to just general public, it seemed that more increased knowledge about having more knowledge about electric vehicles. So I think when I first started, when I was working on the survey, I also had access to a different survey at a location, different location in the same state, and it was clear from the results that this was more to the general public, and you could see from the results that a lot of the respondents didn't necessarily have a good understanding of how electric vehicle worked, but a lot of them thought it was cool. Oh, that's such a cool technology. Oh, that's a solar car, but that's cool. It was clear they didn't have the knowledge. So when I was developing the survey to send out to this group, I had thought this group is going to have more, they're going to have more understanding of this vehicle, and that can actually, that will be a positive thing. There will be more, because they have a better understanding, that would actually make them more likely to be interested in the vehicle. What I found was that having that knowledge actually led to more reservations, because they knew more about the issues with the technology. They knew more about the issues with, even though battery electric vehicles were not, they don't emit emissions and they don't have impacts, from the tailpipe, but you have to have that consideration of the fact if you're living in a place where most of the power generation is from coal, then you're essentially moving that pollution from the tailpipe to the power plant. So those kinds of results, wasn't, concerns that we found, that having more knowledge about electric vehicles actually led to more reservations about willing, to adopt the vehicle.
Great. So I know we're closing, and I want to respond and also bring up another final question here. So one, I'm not sure if Ty knows the answers, but I do know that MCLA does, oh boy, we have a few more. MCLA does have a charging station, and there will soon be a charging station nearby at Mass-MoCA as well. So they do seem to be proliferating.
That's great. That's great.
I'm going to ask a question that came in through my email, and then hand it to Ty maybe to ask the next one. So I think this relates to what you were saying about sort of increased knowledge about some of the questions about sustainability, even though we know that emissions, greenhouse gases should be lower in electric vehicles, especially as we continue to move towards renewable generation sources. So from Chris Derby-Kilfoyle is also bringing up the pollution and environmental justice consequences of lithium and cobalt extraction, and whether specifically he's asking if the survey questioned respondents on battery resource extraction and end-of-life recycling. Could that may have also been a consideration?
So actually that came up in the study. There were lots, this was a really extensive study, so I couldn't really talk about everything, but yes, part of the reservations about the environmental impacts was the impact of extracting lithium and how they considered that to be a negative impact. And so again, there was some skepticism about the actual, how sustainable electric vehicles were. And yes, that did come up. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. Ty, do you want to take one here?
Yeah, so it's a question. We have seen climate change become a focal point in political discourse.
Ty, can you speak up, please? I can't really hear you.
Yeah. We have seen climate change become a focal point in political discourse. Is there a politicalization of electrical vehicles as well?
Great question. I hope not. I do believe that the transportation sector is going through a critical transition, and I believe that electric vehicles should be, will be a part of that. I hope that it doesn't get politicized, because that ends up maybe not having the positive consequence, having negative consequences. So I hope not.
So we will have one last question here that I will share here, and before we close out for the evening. So we have, when comparing electric and fuel cell vehicles, which of the two do you think has a better chance of moving ahead more successfully?
Oh, I would have to say electric vehicles. There's a lot of potential for fuel cell vehicles, but right now what we're talking about is viable near-term technology, technology that is available right now. There's still some issues that need to be worked out with fuel cells to make them commercially and to be available, widely available. And that may happen down the line, but right now electric vehicles are ready to become commercially available and to become more widespread. So there's potential for fuel cell vehicles, but in terms of which one is ready right now, more ready, I would say electric vehicles.
Wonderful.
Thank
Well,
you, great question.
Thank you. Thank you for those questions. Thanks, Ty, for helping to moderate. Thanks to all of you for coming today. Please join us again next week. And Ona, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your research. It's a real pleasure and a contribution to hear more about it. And hopefully we'll continue to see, proliferation of this sustainable technology.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good night, everybody. Then.